The Arizona desert stretched endlessly under the burning summer sun, waves of heat rising from the cracked asphalt of Route 66, like spirits escaping the underworld. At the edge of Kingman, a small town where truckers stopped for coffee and dreamers stopped for gas, a crowd had gathered outside the legendary Iron Horse Rally. Hundreds of motorcycles lined the dusty parking lot, their chrome gleaming like scattered diamonds under the merciless sky. The air smelled of engine oil, leather, and the kind of excitement that only comes when money and pride collide. Marcus Sterling stood at the center of it all, a 62-year-old titan of the motorcycle industry who had built his empire from nothing. His company, Sterling Motors, manufactured the most exclusive custom bikes in America, machines so powerful and beautiful that waiting lists stretched for years. He wore a black leather vest over a white shirt, his silver hair slicked back, his eyes the color of storm clouds. Around his neck hung a medallion shaped like a roaring lion, the symbol of his brand. He was worth billions, but today, he was offering something that made even the wealthiest collectors lean forward with hunger. Behind him, covered by a black silk sheet that fluttered in the hot wind, sat the reason for this gathering. The crowd could see the outline of a motorcycle, but not just any motorcycle. This was the Sterling Phantom, the final creation Marcus would ever build with his own hands. Rumors had swirled for months about this machine. Some said it was cursed. Others said it was simply too powerful for any human to control. 3 professional riders had already tried to tame it during private demonstrations. All 3 had failed, walking away with nothing but bruised egos and the certain knowledge that they had met something beyond their skill. Marcus raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. His voice carried across the parking lot, strong despite his age, commanding despite the casual way he stood. Ladies and gentlemen, riders and dreamers, I've spent 40 years building motorcycles. I've seen champions crowned and legends made. I've watched men and women push the limits of what's possible on 2 wheels. But this, he paused, gripping the silk sheet, this is my masterpiece. The Sterling Phantom, the most advanced, most powerful, most unpredictable motorcycle ever created. He pulled the sheet away, and the crowd gasped collectively. The Phantom was a work of art and engineering merged into one breathtaking form. Its frame was midnight black with veins of electric blue running through it like lightning frozen in time. The engine, visible through a transparent casing, pulsed with an almost organic rhythm. The handlebars curved like the horns of a bull, and the seat was wrapped in leather so dark it seemed to absorb light. But what made everyone stare was the digital display embedded in the fuel tank, showing a constantly shifting pattern of numbers and symbols that no one could quite decipher. This bike has a mind of its own, Marcus continued, walking around the Phantom with the reverence of a priest circling an altar. It learns, it adapts, it challenges. I designed it to be untamable by ordinary riders. Only someone extraordinary can master it. And to prove my point, I'm making an offer that will go down in history. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded check, holding it up for everyone to see. $500 million. That's what I'll pay to anyone who can ride this bike for 10 minutes without falling, without losing control, without giving up. 10 minutes. That's all. The clock starts when you mount, and it stops when you either succeed or fail. The crowd erupted in murmurs and shouts. $500 million. It was an absurd number, a fortune that could change anyone's life forever. Professional riders began pushing forward, their confidence visible in their swagger. Sponsors started making phone calls. Camera crews positioned themselves for the best angles. This was going to be the event of the decade. But Marcus wasn't finished. "There's one condition," he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Before any professional gets a chance, the bike will be available to anyone who wants to try. Anyone at all. Amateur, expert, young, old, rich, poor. Everyone gets one shot. Because I believe that greatness doesn't come from training alone. Sometimes it comes from places we least expect." That was when the line formed. Over the next 4 hours, more than 50 people attempted to ride the Sterling Phantom. The results were consistent and humiliating. Experienced riders lasted seconds before the bike seemed to fight back, bucking and swerving with a will of its own. One man, a 3-time national champion, managed nearly 2 minutes before the Phantom threw him onto the soft sand that Marcus had wisely arranged around the riding area. He walked away, shaking his head, muttering that the bike was possessed. By late afternoon, the crowd had thinned. The initial excitement had been replaced by a kind of fearful respect. People spoke in hushed tones about the phantom, calling it a demon, a beast, a machine that should never have been built. Marcus watched it all with a satisfied smile. His point had been proven. His legacy was secure. No one could tame his creation. And then she appeared. She came from the direction of the highway, walking slowly, her silhouette wavering in the heat like a mirage. As she got closer, people began to notice her. She was a woman in her mid-40s, though the lines on her face suggested a life that had aged her beyond her years. Her clothes were worn and dusty, a faded flannel shirt over jeans that had seen better decades. Her boots were held together with tape and determination. Her hair, once probably beautiful, was now a tangled mess of brown and gray that she had tried to tie back with a piece of string. She carried a small backpack that contained everything she owned in this world. Her name was Eleanor Price, and she had been homeless for the past 7 years. No one knew it then, but Eleanor had once been one of the most promising motorcycle designers in the country. 20 years ago, she had worked for a major manufacturer, creating innovative systems that were ahead of their time. But a series of personal tragedies had broken her. Her husband had died in an accident. Her company had stolen her patents and left her with nothing. She had fought back legally and lost, the system failing her in ways that still kept her awake at night. Eventually, the weight of it all had become too much. She had disappeared from society, choosing the freedom of the road over the prison of a life that had betrayed her. But she had never stopped understanding machines. Even in her lowest moments, when she was sleeping under bridges and eating from dumpsters, she would find abandoned motorcycles and fix them. It was her meditation, her therapy, her connection to the person she used to be. She could hear what an engine was saying the way a musician hears notes. She could feel what a frame needed the way a doctor feels a pulse. Eleanor approached the crowd, staying at the edges, watching the spectacle with curious eyes. She had heard about the rally while hitching a ride with a trucker who had talked about nothing else for 3 hours. She had no intention of participating. She just wanted to see. Maybe remember what it felt like to be around these beautiful machines. Then she heard Marcus make his announcement about the final attempt of the day. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple. Most people had given up. The professionals were scheduled for tomorrow. This was the last chance for anyone else to try. Something stirred in Eleanor, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't hope exactly. It was more like recognition, like the universe was tapping her on the shoulder and asking if she was still paying attention. She started walking toward the phantom. A security guard stepped in her way, his face a mixture of confusion and disgust. "Ma'am, this area is for participants only." "I want to try," Eleanor said. Her voice was rough from disuse but steady. The guard laughed. "You, lady, do you have any idea what this bike costs? You couldn't afford the gas to look at it." The man said anyone could try. That's what I heard. The commotion attracted attention. People turned to stare. Phones came out. Someone started recording. The murmurs spread through the crowd like wildfire. "Is that a homeless woman?" "She can't be serious." "Someone get her out of here." "Wait, this could be funny. Let her try." Marcus Sterling had been talking to a reporter when he noticed the disturbance. He walked over, his eyes scanning Eleanor with the practiced assessment of a man who had spent his life judging people and machines. He saw her worn clothes, her weathered face, her empty hands. But he also saw something else. Something in the way she stood. Something in the way she looked at the phantom. Not with fear. Not with greed. With understanding. "What's your name?" he asked. "Eleanor." "Do you know how to ride, Eleanor?" "I've been riding longer than most of these people have been alive." Marcus smiled. It was a small smile, barely a twitch at the corner of his mouth. But it was there. "The offer stands for everyone," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Let her try." The guard stepped aside, still shaking his head. Eleanor walked toward the phantom, feeling the eyes of hundreds of people on her back. She heard the whispers, the laughter, the cruel jokes. She had heard worse in her years on the street. Words couldn't hurt her anymore. Only silence could. Only giving up. She stopped in front of the motorcycle, and did something no one expected. She didn't immediately mount it. Instead, she crouched down and placed her hand on the frame, closing her eyes. The crowd went quiet, confused by this strange behavior. Some thought she was praying. Others thought she had lost her mind completely. But Eleanor was listening. She was feeling the vibrations of the engine, even though it was barely idling. She was sensing the tension in the frame, the weight distribution, the subtle imbalances that made this machine so unpredictable. In her mind, she wasn't in a dusty parking lot surrounded by strangers. She was in her old workshop 20 years ago, when machines still spoke to her and the world still made sense. The Phantom was complicated, more complicated than anything she had ever encountered. Its systems were designed to fight the rider, to challenge every input with a counter-input. It was brilliant engineering, she realized. Marcus Sterling wasn't testing strength or speed. He was testing adaptability, intuition, the ability to work with chaos instead of against it. Eleanor opened her eyes and smiled. She mounted the Phantom in one fluid motion, her body settling into the seat like she had sat there 1,000 times. Her hands found the grips naturally, her feet positioned themselves perfectly. The digital display on the fuel tank flickered, then began showing a new pattern, as if the machine was acknowledging her presence. Marcus pressed the button on his stopwatch. The crowd held its breath. Eleanor didn't gun the engine. She didn't try to dominate the bike. Instead, she simply let it move, matching its rhythm with her own, anticipating its challenges before they came. The Phantom swerved left. She leaned right just enough to compensate. It accelerated suddenly. She adjusted her weight to maintain balance. It braked unexpectedly. She was already shifting forward to absorb the momentum. 1 minute passed. The crowd's mockery had turned to silence. 2 minutes. The silence turned to disbelief. 3 minutes. Disbelief turned to awe. Eleanor was dancing with the machine, a perfect partnership between human intuition and mechanical complexity. She wasn't fighting the Phantom. She was communicating with it. And for the first time since Marcus had built it, the bike seemed to respond with something other than aggression. Its movements became smoother, its challenges less erratic. It was as if the machine had found what it was looking for. 5 minutes. People started cheering. 7 minutes. The cheers became roars. 9 minutes. Eleanor could feel the fatigue in her muscles, the strain of maintaining such intense focus. But she could also feel something else. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. The kind she hadn't felt since before her life fell apart. She was doing what she was born to do, and nothing else mattered. 10 minutes. Marcus pressed the stopwatch and the crowd exploded. People were screaming, crying, jumping up and down. Strangers hugged each other. The impossible had happened. A homeless woman, dismissed and mocked by everyone, had done what champions couldn't. Eleanor brought the Phantom to a gentle stop and dismounted with the same grace she had shown throughout the ride. Her legs were shaking, but she stood tall, facing Marcus Sterling across the dusty lot. The billionaire walked toward her slowly, his face unreadable. The crowd quieted, waiting to see what he would do. Would he honor his word? Would he really give $500 million to this woman who looked like she didn't have $5 to her name? Marcus stopped in front of Eleanor and extended his hand. "I've been building motorcycles for 40 years, he said, his voice thick with emotion he rarely showed. "I thought I understood them. I thought I knew everything there was to know. But watching you just now, you taught me something. Something I should have learned a long time ago." Eleanor shook his hand. "What's that?" "That the best riders aren't the ones who try to control the machine. They're the ones who listen to it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the check. "This belongs to you. You earned it. Every penny." Eleanor looked at the check in her hand. $500 million. A number so large it barely felt real. She thought about all the years she had spent on the streets, all the cold nights and hungry days, all the moments when she had wondered if her life would ever mean anything again. And then she looked at Marcus, at the crowd, at the beautiful machine that had given her this impossible gift. "Thank you," she said simply. Because sometimes the biggest moments don't need big words. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. Stories like this one, where ordinary people achieve extraordinary things, are what we live to share. Subscribe now so you never miss a moment when the underdog rises. The news spread like wildfire across the country. Within hours, Eleanor Price was the most talked about person in America. News crews descended on Kingman, trying to find her, interview her, capture her story for their hungry audiences. Social media exploded with videos of her ride, viewed millions of times, shared across every platform. Hashtags like Phantom Lady and Eleanor Rides trended worldwide. People who had dismissed her hours ago were now calling her an inspiration, a hero, a legend. But Eleanor had disappeared. After accepting the check from Marcus Sterling, she had quietly walked away from the crowd, found a quiet spot behind an abandoned gas station, and sat down on an overturned milk crate. For a long time, she just stared at the piece of paper in her hands. It was signed, certified, absolutely real. $500 million. Enough to buy anything she could imagine. Enough to fix any problem money could solve. The thing was, Eleanor had learned something in her years on the street. Money couldn't fix everything. It couldn't bring back the dead. It couldn't erase the past. It couldn't fill the emptiness that came from being betrayed by everyone she had trusted. Money was a tool, nothing more. And like any tool, its value depended entirely on how you used it. She thought about her husband, David, who had died 13 years ago in a factory accident that never should have happened. Safety violations that the company had covered up. A lawsuit that had been dismissed because she couldn't afford better lawyers than the corporation. David had been the kindest man she had ever known, a high school teacher who volunteered at homeless shelters on weekends because he believed everyone deserved dignity. He had supported Eleanor's dreams of becoming a motorcycle designer, encouraging her even when others said a woman had no place in that industry. His death had broken something in her that had never fully healed. She thought about her former company, Velocity Dynamics, where she had worked for 8 years creating revolutionary engine systems. The patents she had developed. The innovations that had made them millions. And then the day they had called her into a conference room and told her she was being terminated, that her work belonged to them now, that she would receive nothing. She had fought in court for 3 years, spending every penny she had, selling everything she owned, until finally a judge ruled against her. The system, she had learned, was designed to protect the powerful. People like her were expendable. She thought about the years that followed, the spiral into depression, the eviction notices, the shelters that were full, the nights sleeping in doorways, in parks, under overpasses. The way people looked through her like she was invisible, or looked at her with disgust, as if poverty were a character flaw. The constant hunger, the constant fear, the constant exhaustion of existing in a world that had no place for her. And now this. $500 million. A second chance that most people could only dream of. Eleanor folded the check carefully and put it in her backpack. She had decisions to make. Important ones. But not tonight. Tonight, she just wanted to rest. She found a cheap motel at the edge of town, the kind of place that asked no questions and took cash. The room was small and smelled faintly of cigarettes, but it had a bed, a shower, and a door that locked. For Eleanor, it felt like a palace. She stood under the hot water for almost an hour, washing away years of road dust and weariness. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a thin towel, she barely recognized the woman in the mirror. She was older than she remembered, thinner, harder, but there was something in her eyes now that hadn't been there this morning. Hope, maybe, or at least the absence of despair. She slept for 14 hours straight, the deepest sleep she had experienced in years. The next morning, she woke to someone knocking on her door. She approached cautiously, years of street survival making her wary. "Who is it?" "My name is Thomas Reed. I'm an attorney. Mr. Sterling sent me." Eleanor opened the door to find a young man in an expensive suit, holding a briefcase and looking distinctly uncomfortable in the shabby motel hallway. He was maybe 30, with neat brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses that made him look like a college professor. "May I come in?" he asked. "I have some important matters to discuss with you." Eleanor stepped aside, and Thomas entered, his eyes scanning the room without judgment. He sat on the room's only chair and opened his briefcase. "First," he said, "Mr. Sterling wants you to know that the check is completely valid. You can deposit it at any bank. However, he also wants to offer you some assistance in managing such a significant sum. Financial advisors, tax specialists, whatever you need. All paid for by him, with no strings attached. That's generous, Eleanor said carefully. He was impressed by you, more than impressed. He said watching you ride was like watching a master painter work. He wants to help you if you'll let him. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, processing this information. What else? Thomas pulled out a folder. There's more. The media is going crazy trying to find you. Offers are pouring in. Talk shows, endorsement deals, book publishers, movie studios. Everyone wants a piece of your story. I've been fielding calls all morning. I don't want any of that. I understand, but you should know that your face is everywhere now. Anonymity might not be an option. Eleanor had expected this. The world loved a good underdog story, especially one as dramatic as hers, but she had no interest in becoming a celebrity. She had learned long ago that public attention was a double-edged sword. Is there anything else? Thomas hesitated, then pulled out another document. This is perhaps the most interesting development. Several of the professional riders who were scheduled to attempt the Phantom today are requesting that your ride be invalidated. They're claiming that there must have been some kind of trickery involved, that no one could actually do what you did. They're threatening legal action against Mr. Sterling. Eleanor laughed. It was a genuine laugh, the first in longer than she could remember. Trickery? I can barely afford a meal, and they think I somehow rigged a billion-dollar motorcycle. Their lawyers are reaching. Mr. Sterling isn't concerned. He has video evidence from multiple angles, and the bike's internal sensors recorded everything. Your ride was legitimate, but I wanted you to be aware that there might be some unpleasantness ahead. Eleanor nodded slowly. Of course there would be unpleasantness. Powerful people didn't like being shown up by those they considered beneath them. She had learned that lesson the hard way with velocity dynamics, but she was older now, stronger in ways that had nothing to do with physical strength. She had survived worse than the bruised egos of professional riders. Thank you for telling me, she said. I appreciate your honesty. Thomas closed his briefcase and stood. One more thing. Mr. Sterling asked me to give you this. He pulled out an envelope. Inside was a card with a phone number written on it. His personal line. He said to call any time for any reason. He says you're the most impressive person he's met in 40 years, and he doesn't say that lightly. After Thomas left, Eleanor sat alone in the motel room, thinking about everything that had happened. In the span of 24 hours, her entire existence had transformed. She had gone from having nothing to having more money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes. She had gone from being invisible to being the most famous woman in the country. She had gone from hopelessness to something that felt almost like possibility. But what did she want to do with all of it? The answer came to her slowly, rising from the depths of her memory like a whale surfacing for air. David, her husband. The man who had spent his weekends at homeless shelters because he believed everyone deserved dignity. What would he do with $500 million? The answer was obvious. He would help people. Not in some distant, abstract way. Not by writing checks to charities he'd never see. He would help people directly, personally, in ways that actually mattered. Eleanor picked up the motel phone and called the number on the card. Marcus Sterling answered on the second ring. Eleanor, I was hoping you'd call. I need your help, she said. I have an idea, but I don't know how to make it happen. Tell me. And so she did. For the next hour, Eleanor outlined her vision. A foundation dedicated to helping homeless individuals rebuild their lives. Not just shelters, though those were important, but job training programs, mental health support, legal assistance for those who had been cheated by the system. A network of mechanic shops that would teach skills and employ people who had nowhere else to go. A fleet of mobile units that would bring services directly to those who couldn't access them. I want to call it the David Price Foundation, Eleanor said. After my husband. He believed that everyone had value no matter their circumstances. I want to prove him right. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Marcus spoke, his voice uncharacteristically soft. Eleanor, I've met a lot of people in my life. Billionaires, celebrities, politicians. Most of them, when they get money, they think about themselves first. Mansions, yachts, private islands. You just won $500 million, and your first thought is how to give it away. Not give it away. Invest it in people who deserve a chance. Another pause. I want to help, not just with advice. I want to contribute. Match your foundation's funding. Make it twice as powerful. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. You'd do that? I've spent my whole life building machines. Maybe it's time I helped build something that matters more. They talked for another hour, refining the plans, discussing logistics, imagining possibilities. By the time Eleanor hung up, she had the framework for something that could change thousands of lives. But first, she had some personal business to attend to. The town of Riverside, California, had changed in the years since Eleanor had left it. New buildings had risen where empty lots used to be. Shopping centers had replaced the small businesses she remembered. But some things remained the same. The cemetery where David was buried still sat on the same hill, overlooking the valley where they had once planned to build a home together. Eleanor arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after her victory in Arizona. She had purchased new clothes, simple but clean, and had visited a salon to restore some order to her hair. She didn't look like a billionaire. She looked like a woman who had weathered storms and emerged standing. The grave marker was simple. David Andrew Price. Beloved husband. Teacher. Friend. 1962-2011. Eleanor knelt in front of it, placing a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked from the roadside. Hey, she said softly. It's been a while. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of eucalyptus and morning dew. Something crazy happened. You wouldn't believe it if I told you. Actually, you probably would. You always believed in crazy things. You believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. She touched the cold stone, her fingers tracing the carved letters of his name. I'm going to do something good, David. Something big. I'm going to help people like you always wanted to. All those weekends at the shelter, all those lectures about human dignity. I finally understand why it mattered so much to you. When you have nothing, when the world treats you like you're worthless, a small act of kindness can save your life. I know because I've been there. I've been the person everyone looks through. And now, I have the chance to be the person who looks back. A bird landed on the headstone, a small brown sparrow that studied Eleanor with curious eyes before flying away. I miss you, she whispered, every day. But I think maybe you've been with me all along, guiding me, keeping me going when I wanted to give up. So thank you. For everything. For loving me. For believing in me. For being the reason I didn't completely lose myself. She stayed at the grave for another hour, not speaking, just sitting in the peace of the morning. When she finally stood, she felt lighter, like something that had been holding her down had finally released its grip. There was one more stop she needed to make. The headquarters of Velocity Dynamics occupied a gleaming tower in downtown Los Angeles. 20 stories of glass and steel, a monument to corporate success built on innovations that Eleanor had created. Every time she had seen photos of the building in magazines, she had felt a mixture of rage and grief. This was what her work had become, a trophy for people who had stolen from her. But today, Eleanor walked through the front doors without fear. She was no longer the desperate woman who had lost everything to their lawyers. She was someone new, someone with resources, someone with power. The receptionist looked up with a practiced smile. Welcome to Velocity Dynamics. How can I help you? I'd like to see Richard Carver. Tell him Eleanor Price is here. The smile faltered. I'm sorry, do you have an appointment? No. But tell him I'm here anyway. Tell him it's about the Phantom. The receptionist made a call, speaking in hushed tones, her eyes darting to Eleanor with increasing nervousness. Within minutes, a security guard appeared, followed by a middle-aged woman in a business suit who introduced herself as the VP of Communications. Ms. Price, I'm afraid Mr. Carver is in meetings all day. Perhaps we could schedule something for next week. I'll wait. That's really not possible. If you could just leave your contact information. I said I'll wait. Eleanor sat down in one of the lobby's leather chairs, crossed her legs, and pulled out her phone. She had learned patience in her years on the street. She could wait all day if necessary. The next 3 hours were a dance of corporate anxiety. More executives appeared, offering empty pleasantries and transparent excuses. Security guards hovered nearby, unsure what to do with someone who wasn't technically breaking any rules. Phone calls were made, meetings were interrupted. The entire building seemed to vibrate with tension. Finally, at 4:47 p.m., Richard Carver himself appeared. He was older than Eleanor remembered, heavier, his once dark hair now gray and thinning. He wore a suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. His face was arranged in an expression of careful neutrality, but his eyes betrayed him. There was fear there. Guilt. The look of a man who knew exactly what he had done and had hoped never to face the consequences. "Eleanor," he said, "it's been a long time. 15 years. Yes, well, perhaps we should talk in private." He led her to an elevator, then to a corner office on the 20th floor with a view of the entire city. The walls were decorated with awards and patents, many of which bore designs Eleanor recognized as her own. She said nothing. She simply waited. Richard sat behind his desk, a fortress of mahogany between them. "I assume you're here about the recent publicity. I'm here about what you stole from me. Eleanor, everything that happened was perfectly legal. The contracts were clear. All work produced by employees belonged to the company. The contracts were designed to exploit people like me. You knew what you were doing. You knew I would never have the resources to fight you. Business isn't always fair, but it is legal." Eleanor leaned forward. "Let me tell you what's going to happen, Richard. I now have $500 million in access to the best lawyers in the country. I also have the attention of every media outlet in America. You have a choice. We can do this publicly, in courtrooms, with investigations into every questionable practice this company has engaged in over the past 2 decades. Or we can do this quietly." Richard's face had gone pale. "What do you want?" "I want acknowledgement. A public statement crediting me for the innovations I created. I want compensation. Not for me. For every engineer and designer you've exploited over the years, a fund to be administered by an independent board. And I want changes, real policies that protect employees' intellectual property rights. That's impossible. The board would never agree. Then I guess we're doing this publicly." Eleanor stood. "I'll have my lawyers contact you tomorrow." "Wait," Richard's voice cracked. "Just wait. Let me talk to people, see what we can do." Eleanor paused at the door. "You have 1 week, Richard. After that, I start making phone calls. And trust me, I have plenty to say." She walked out of Velocity Dynamics with her head high, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Vindication, not revenge. She didn't want to destroy Richard or his company. She wanted justice. She wanted acknowledgement. She wanted to make sure what happened to her never happened to anyone else. The week that followed was a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, Marcus Sterling had connected Eleanor with an army of professionals. Lawyers who filed incorporation documents for the David Price Foundation. Financial advisors who developed sustainable investment strategies. Public relations experts who helped her navigate the constant media attention. Architects who began designing the first of what would eventually be dozens of facilities across the country. Eleanor found herself in meetings from morning until night, learning about nonprofit governance, tax regulations, real estate acquisition. It was exhausting, but also exhilarating. For the first time in over a decade, she had purpose, direction, something to wake up for every morning. She also made time for something else. Every evening, regardless of how busy her schedule, she would find a homeless encampment somewhere in whatever city she happened to be in. She would bring food, supplies, and most importantly, conversation. She would sit with people who reminded her of herself, listening to their stories, sharing her own, reminding them that they were not forgotten. I want you to pause right now and type in the comments, "Everyone deserves a second chance." Because this is the truth that Eleanor understood. No matter how far we fall, redemption is always possible. And sometimes it comes from the most unexpected places. The responses from Velocity Dynamics came exactly 1 week after Eleanor's visit. A formal statement acknowledging her contributions to multiple key technologies. A $20 million settlement fund for former employees who had been similarly exploited. New policies regarding intellectual property rights, overseen by an independent ethics board. It wasn't everything Eleanor had demanded, but it was more than she had ever dared hope for. The announcement made national news, sparking broader conversations about corporate exploitation and workers' rights. Other companies began reviewing their own policies, eager to avoid similar scrutiny. Advocates credited Eleanor's case with inspiring a wave of reforms across the tech industry. But for Eleanor, the greatest satisfaction came from something far simpler. 3 weeks after her victory over the Phantom, she received a letter. It was handwritten on plain paper with no return address. Inside were just 3 words: "I believe again." Someone out there, someone who had seen her story, had found the courage to hope. That single letter meant more to Eleanor than all the money, all the fame, all the vindication combined. The David Price Foundation officially launched on a bright spring morning 6 months after Eleanor's ride through the Arizona desert. The ceremony took place at the foundation's first facility, a converted warehouse in Los Angeles that had been transformed into a state-of-the-art training center. The building featured mechanics bays, where homeless individuals could learn marketable skills, counseling rooms staffed by licensed therapists, a legal clinic offering free services, and a dining hall that served 3 meals a day to anyone who needed them. The guest list read like a who's who of industry leaders, celebrities, and politicians. But the most important guests were the 100 homeless individuals who had been invited to attend, seated in places of honor at the front of the assembly. These were the people the foundation existed to serve. These were the faces that gave meaning to everything Eleanor had accomplished. Marcus Sterling stood at the podium, delivering the opening remarks. His voice, usually so commanding, trembled with emotion as he spoke about the woman who had walked into his rally with nothing and walked out having changed everything. "I've spent my life building machines," he said. "I thought that was my legacy, my contribution to the world. But Eleanor Price taught me something invaluable. Machines are just tools. What matters is what we build with them: communities, opportunities, hope. That's the real legacy. That's what we should all be striving for." When it was Eleanor's turn to speak, she stood before the crowd in simple clothes, her transformation visible not in expensive accessories, but in the confidence of her posture, the clarity of her gaze. She had prepared a speech, carefully written and reviewed by multiple advisors. She set it aside. 15 years ago, she began. "I lost everything: my husband, my work, my home, my faith in humanity. I spent years wandering, invisible, forgotten. I know what it feels like to be hungry, to be cold, to wonder if anyone would care if I simply disappeared. That pain doesn't go away just because your circumstances change. It stays with you. It becomes part of who you are." She looked out at the homeless guests in the front rows, meeting their eyes one by one. "But here's what I've learned. Pain can be transformed. It can become purpose. It can become the fuel that drives us to make sure others don't suffer the same way we did. I'm not standing here today because I'm special. I'm standing here because I'm lucky. I got a chance most people never get, and I refuse to waste it." She gestured to the building around her. "This is just the beginning. One facility, one city, one small step. But every journey starts with a single step. Every change starts with someone deciding that things can be different. So I'm asking all of you, not just the wealthy donors or the famous guests, but everyone watching this, everyone who has ever felt invisible, everyone who has ever wondered if their life matters. Your life matters, your voice matters, and together, we can build something better." The applause was thunderous, but Eleanor barely heard it. She was thinking about David, about how proud he would have been, about how every person in this room represented a piece of the dream they had once shared. After the ceremony, she made her way through the crowd, accepting congratulations she didn't feel she deserved, thanking contributors whose names she couldn't remember. At some point, she found herself alone in a quiet corner, watching the celebration continue without her. A woman approached. She was young, maybe 25, with the weathered look of someone who had lived on the streets. Her clothes were clean but worn, provided by one of the intake programs Eleanor had funded. "Ms. Price?" the woman said hesitantly. "Please, call me Eleanor. I just wanted to say, I was at the rally in Arizona. I was there when you rode that bike." Eleanor studied her with new interest. "You were?" "I hitched a ride to see the motorcycles. I used to love them, before everything fell apart. And then I watched you, this woman who looked just like me, just as tired, just as broken. And you did something amazing. You showed everyone that we're not worthless, that we still have value. Tears were streaming down the young woman's face now. "I almost gave up so many times," she continued. "But every time I thought about ending it all, I remembered you. I remembered that a woman like me could master what champions couldn't. And I thought, maybe I can do something amazing too. Maybe my story isn't over yet." Eleanor pulled the young woman into a hug, holding her tight, feeling their shared pain merge into something that felt almost like healing. "What's your name?" Eleanor asked. "Maria." "Maria, I want you to know something. You've already done something amazing. You're here. You survived. You kept going when everything told you to stop. That's extraordinary. And whatever comes next for you, whatever challenges you face, remember that you've already proven you're strong enough to overcome them." Maria sobbed against Eleanor's shoulder. "Thank you. Thank you for everything. Don't thank me. Pay it forward. When you're in a position to help someone else, do it. That's how we change the world, one person at a time." The conversation with Maria stayed with Eleanor long after the celebration ended. It reminded her why she was doing all of this, not for recognition, not for redemption, for the simple, profound impact of showing others that their lives mattered. Over the following months, the David Price Foundation expanded rapidly. New facilities opened in San Francisco, Phoenix, Denver, and Chicago. The mechanics training program became particularly successful, with graduates finding employment at dealerships and repair shops across the country. Several of Marcus Sterling's business contacts began hiring directly from the program, impressed by the quality of training and the dedication of the graduates. The legal clinic took on increasingly complex cases, challenging unjust policies and corporate exploitation wherever they found it. Several high-profile victories brought national attention to issues affecting homeless populations, from criminalization of homelessness to inadequate mental health services. Politicians who had once ignored these issues suddenly found themselves facing questions from constituents inspired by Eleanor's work. Eleanor herself remained deeply involved in every aspect of the foundation, but she also knew when to step back. She hired talented administrators who shared her vision, empowering them to make decisions without constantly deferring to her. She wanted the foundation to outlive her, to become something bigger than any single person. That meant building systems and cultures that could sustain themselves. She also continued her evening visits to homeless encampments, though now she often brought teams of volunteers and resources. Word spread through the homeless community about the woman who had once been one of them, who had achieved the impossible and had chosen to use her fortune to help others. Her presence brought hope in ways that money alone never could. One evening, about a year after the foundation's launch, Eleanor received an unexpected visitor at her new apartment in San Francisco. She had purchased the place not for its luxury, but for its proximity to the foundation's regional headquarters. It was modest by billionaire standards. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a view of the bay that reminded her of the vast possibilities that had once seemed so distant. The visitor was an older man, weathered and lean, with the kind of face that had seen too much and forgotten too little. He introduced himself as Carl Hutchins, and he had traveled 300 miles to tell Eleanor something important. "I was in the crowd that day," he said, settling into the chair Eleanor offered. "At the rally. When you rode that bike." Eleanor smiled. "I'm meeting a lot of people who were there. I was different from the others, though. I wasn't cheering for you. I was laughing. I thought you were a fool, a homeless woman trying to do something only experts could manage. I thought I was going to watch you fail, and I was going to enjoy it." His honesty was startling, but Eleanor appreciated it. "What changed? You didn't fail. You succeeded in a way I never thought possible, and it made me think about all the other things I had dismissed as impossible, all the people I had written off, all the chances I had refused to take because I assumed the outcome before it even happened." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I was a judge, Eleanor, for 30 years. I presided over thousands of cases, and I realized, sitting in that crowd, watching you prove everyone wrong, that I had probably made terrible decisions. I had looked at defendants who looked like you, dismissed, worn, forgotten, and I had assumed things about them. I had let my biases guide my judgments. How many people did I send away who deserved better? How many chances did I deny because I couldn't see past their circumstances?" Eleanor felt her heart constricting. She understood this pain all too well. "What are you doing now?" she asked. "I retired early. Started volunteering at legal clinics. started listening instead of judging, started trying to fix some of the damage I caused. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded check. This is my retirement savings. I want to donate it to your foundation. I want it to help the people I failed. Eleanor looked at the check. It was for $200,000. Not a fortune by her new standards, but clearly everything Carl had. I can't accept this, she said gently. You need this money to live. What I need, Carl replied firmly, is to know that my life meant something more than sending people to prison. Please, let me do this one good thing. They talked for hours, about justice and mercy, about the systems that failed people, about the small choices that accumulated into patterns of harm or healing. By the end of the night, Eleanor had agreed to accept Carl's donation, but only on the condition that he join the Foundation's advisory board. His experience as a judge, however flawed, could help them navigate the legal complexities they faced. His redemption could become part of their mission. Carl agreed, tears in his eyes. Thank you, he said. Thank you for giving me something to believe in again. The Foundation's second anniversary was marked by a milestone that even Eleanor hadn't anticipated. They had now served over 50,000 individuals across 8 states. The mechanics training program had graduated 3,000 students with a 90% employment rate. The legal clinic had won cases that established new precedents for homeless rights. The counseling services had provided hundreds of thousands of hours of support to people struggling with trauma, addiction, and despair. But numbers, Eleanor had learned, only told part of the story. The real measure of success was in the faces of the people they served. The mother who had reconnected with her children after years of separation. The veteran who had finally received the treatment he deserved. The young artist who had created a mural on the Foundation's wall depicting the journey from darkness to light. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile. Marcus Sterling had become one of Eleanor's closest confidants, a friendship that would have seemed impossible 2 years ago. He had matched her Foundation's funding as promised and had become increasingly involved in their work. His motorcycle company had partnered with the training program, providing equipment and job opportunities. His network of wealthy contacts had been invaluable in securing additional funding and support. But more than his money, Eleanor valued his perspective. Marcus had spent his life in a world of power and privilege. He understood how those systems worked, where their vulnerabilities lay, how to navigate them to achieve real change. Together, they made an effective team. Eleanor providing the vision and the moral compass, Marcus providing the strategic insight and the access. One evening, as they sat on the patio of Marcus's Arizona ranch, watching the sun set over the same desert where Eleanor had achieved the impossible, he asked her a question he had been pondering for a long time. Do you ever regret it? Regret what? Taking the challenge, riding the Phantom, everything that came after. Eleanor considered the question carefully. Her life had been transformed in ways she never could have predicted. She had gone from invisibility to fame, from poverty to wealth, from hopelessness to purpose. But she had also lost the simplicity of her old existence, the freedom of anonymity, the peace of having nothing to protect. No, she finally said. I don't regret it. But I do sometimes miss who I was before. Marcus nodded, understanding. The person who rode that bike wasn't the homeless woman everyone saw. It was the engineer, the designer, the passionate soul who had been buried for years. You didn't become someone new that day. You remembered who you had always been. Eleanor smiled. That's the most insightful thing you've ever said. I have my moments. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the colors of the sky shift from orange to purple to the deep blue of approaching night. There's something else I've been thinking about, Marcus said. The Phantom. It's been sitting in my garage since that day. I never let anyone else try it, never even turned it on. It feels like it belongs to you somehow. What are you suggesting? I want to give it to you, not sell it. Give it. Think of it as a symbol of what you accomplished. A reminder that the impossible is only impossible until someone does it. Eleanor felt emotion welling up in her chest. Marcus, I can't accept something that valuable. It's already yours, Eleanor. It always was. I just didn't know it until I watched you ride. The transfer of the Phantom to Eleanor was handled quietly, without media attention. She had the motorcycle transported to her San Francisco apartment, where she kept it in a small garage that she had specifically rented for this purpose. She didn't ride it often. The bike was too distinctive, too recognizable. But sometimes, late at night when the world was sleeping, she would go down to the garage just to sit beside it, to remember the day everything changed. The third anniversary of the foundation brought challenges that tested everything they had built. A political shift in several states led to budget cuts for social services, increasing the demand on charitable organizations like Eleanor's. Economic downturns meant that donations decreased just when they were needed most. Several key staff members left for better-paying positions, creating gaps in expertise that were difficult to fill. Eleanor responded by doubling down on her commitment. She increased her own contributions, drawing on investments that had grown substantially thanks to Marcus's financial advisors. She personally recruited new talent, offering not just salaries but shares in the foundation's mission. She traveled constantly, meeting with donors, politicians, and community leaders, advocating tirelessly for the populations she served. The strain was visible. Her health, already compromised by years of hard living, began to suffer. She lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. Dark circles appeared under her eyes. Friends and colleagues expressed concern, urging her to slow down, to take care of herself. She listened politely and changed nothing. It was Maria, the young woman from the foundation's launch, who finally got through to her. Maria had flourished in the years since their first meeting. She had completed the mechanics training program with top marks, secured a job at a prestigious dealership, and had recently been promoted to head technician. She had also become one of the foundation's most effective ambassadors, sharing her story with donors and media outlets, inspiring others who had faced similar struggles. She visited Eleanor on a rainy afternoon when the foundation's leader was in particularly poor shape. Eleanor had been working 18-hour days for weeks, and it showed. "You look terrible," Maria said bluntly. "Thank you for your candor. Eleanor, you taught me that my life has value, that I'm worth protecting. Why don't you believe the same about yourself?" Eleanor opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. She didn't have a good answer. "The foundation needs you," Maria continued. "But it needs you healthy. It needs you present. It needs you to be an example of what's possible, not a cautionary tale of what happens when someone gives everything until there's nothing left. I have responsibilities. You have a responsibility to yourself too. You can't pour from an empty cup. That's what the counselors always told me. I didn't believe it until I almost destroyed myself trying to prove them wrong." Eleanor sat down heavily, suddenly exhausted. "When did you become so wise?" "I learned from the best." That night, Eleanor made a decision. She would step back from the day-to-day operations of the foundation, at least temporarily. She would appoint trusted deputies to handle the constant crises. She would focus on the long-term vision, the strategic direction, while allowing others to manage the immediate demands. It was one of the hardest things she had ever done. Harder than riding the Phantom. Harder than facing velocity dynamics. Letting go of control, trusting others, accepting help. These were challenges that cut against every instinct she had developed during her years of survival. But she did it. And slowly, gradually, her health improved. Her energy returned. Her perspective broadened. She began to see possibilities she had been too exhausted to notice before. The fourth year of the foundation brought expansion into territories Eleanor had never anticipated. International partnerships emerged with organizations in Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia, adapting the foundation's models for different contexts. Research collaborations with universities produced data demonstrating the effectiveness of their approaches, influencing policy discussions at the highest levels. A documentary about Eleanor's journey, produced by a major studio, won awards and inspired countless others to take action. Through it all, Eleanor remained grounded. She never forgot where she had come from. She never stopped visiting homeless encampments, though now she often encountered people who recognized her and wanted to share how her story had impacted them. She never stopped listening, learning, growing. One autumn morning, 5 years after her ride in Arizona, Eleanor received a letter that would mark the culmination of everything she had worked for. It was from the White House, informing her that she had been selected to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her humanitarian contributions. The ceremony was held in the East Room, surrounded by dignitaries and cameras. Eleanor wore a simple dress, elegant but understated. She stood straight as the president placed the medal around her neck, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She was thinking about David, about all the homeless individuals who had trusted her with their stories, about Maria, Carl, Marcus, and countless others who had become part of her journey. When it was time for her to speak, she approached the podium with the same mix of nervousness and determination she had felt before mounting the Phantom. 5 years ago, I was homeless, invisible, forgotten. I had given up on myself and on the world. Then something happened that I never could have predicted. I was given a chance to prove that I still had value. That chance changed everything. She paused, collecting herself. But here's what I want you to understand. What happened to me was extraordinary, but it shouldn't have been necessary. We live in a country of incredible wealth and opportunity. There is no reason why anyone should fall through the cracks the way I did. No reason why people should have to perform miracles just to be seen as human. The room was silent, hanging on every word. The true measure of a society isn't how it treats its most successful members. It's how it treats its most vulnerable. We can do better. We must do better. And I believe we will, if we choose to see each other not as problems to be solved, but as people to be cherished. The applause was long and loud, but Eleanor barely noticed. She was already thinking about the next challenge, the next opportunity, the next person who needed to know that their life mattered. If you watched this far, it's because you felt something in this story that resonated with your heart. Leave a comment saying, "I watched this far," so I can get to know you and know who really likes the stories on this channel. 6 years after the rally in Arizona, Eleanor Price sat on the patio of a small house she had purchased near the coast of Northern California. It wasn't luxurious, the house she chose, just comfortable, just enough. The bulk of her fortune remained invested in the foundation, which now operated in 12 countries and had helped over 200,000 people rebuild their lives. The Phantom sat in her garage, covered with a silk sheet, a monument to the day everything changed. She rode it occasionally on quiet mornings when the fog rolled in from the ocean and the world felt peaceful. Each ride reminded her of who she had been, who she had become, and the distance between those two people. Marcus Sterling visited often, despite his declining health. He was in his late 60s now, his legendary energy finally beginning to fade. But his mind remained sharp, and his commitment to the foundation never wavered. He had become like a father to Eleanor, filling a role that had been empty since her own parents passed decades ago. On this particular evening, they sat together watching the sunset, as they had done so many times before. "I've been thinking about legacies," Marcus said, his voice softer than it used to be. "What we leave behind when we're gone. And what have you concluded? That the best legacies aren't monuments or museums. They're the changes we make in people's lives, the hope we give them, the proof that things can be different." Eleanor nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "You gave me that proof, you know," Marcus continued. "When you rode the Phantom, I had spent my life building machines, thinking that was what mattered. You showed me that machines are just means to an end. What matters is what we do with them, how we use them to serve something greater than ourselves." "You taught me things too," Eleanor replied. "About power, about influence, about how to navigate systems designed to keep people down. We taught each other. That's what the best relationships do." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. "I'm not going to be around much longer," Marcus said quietly. "The doctors have been clear about that, but I'm at peace with it. I've seen my legacy take shape in ways I never imagined. The foundation, the partnerships, the thousands of people who are living better lives because of what we built together." Eleanor felt tears threatening, but held them back. "You're not allowed to leave yet. There's still too much to do." Marcus laughed, a weak echo of his former booming voice. "There will always be too much to do. That's the nature of meaningful work. It never ends, but it continues without us. That's the beauty of building something bigger than yourself." He reached over and took her hand, his grip still surprisingly strong. "Promise me something, Eleanor. Anything. Promise me you'll keep going. No matter what challenges come. No matter how tired you get. The world needs people like you. People who have seen the worst of humanity and still believe in the best of it. people who turn their pain into purpose. I promise, Eleanor said, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus squeezed her hand once more, then released it. Good. Now, I believe there's a documentary crew arriving tomorrow to film something about the Foundation's anniversary. You should probably get some rest, says the man who never rested a day in his life. Do as I say, not as I did. They laughed together, the sound carrying across the quiet evening, a testament to a friendship that had changed both of their lives. Marcus Sterling passed away 3 months later, peacefully, surrounded by the people who loved him. The motorcycle industry mourned one of its greatest innovators. The business world acknowledged the loss of a titan. But for Eleanor, the loss was far more personal. She had lost her mentor, her friend, her partner in building something that would outlast them both. The funeral was private, per Marcus's wishes. Just a small gathering of close friends and family at his Arizona ranch, the same place where they had shared so many conversations about life, purpose, and the meaning of legacy. Eleanor spoke briefly, her words simple but sincere. Marcus Sterling was many things to many people, an inventor, a businessman, a visionary. But to me, he was something more. He was proof that people can change, that cynicism can become hope, that wealth can become generosity. He didn't just give me money. He gave me belief in myself when I had none left. He gave me partnership when I thought I was alone. He gave me friendship when I had forgotten what that word meant. She paused, looking at the faces gathered around her. The greatest tribute we can pay to Marcus is to continue the work we started together, to keep building, to keep serving, to keep proving that the impossible is only impossible until someone does it. That's what he would want. That's how we honor him. After the service, Eleanor walked through the desert, following the same road where she had first approached the rally that changed everything. The landscape hadn't changed. The same sun beat down on the same cracked asphalt. The same wind carried the same dust across the same endless expanse. But she had changed, profoundly, irrevocably, in ways that still surprised her when she stopped to think about them. She thought about the journey she had traveled, from promising engineer to homeless wanderer to accidental billionaire to humanitarian leader. Each phase had taught her something essential. Each struggle had prepared her for what came next. Even the darkest years, the ones she had thought were wasted, had shaped her into someone capable of creating real change. She thought about David, her husband, whose memory had guided her even when she couldn't feel his presence. The foundation bore his name, but it was more than a memorial. It was a continuation of his life's work, expressed on a scale he never could have imagined. Somewhere, she believed, he was proud of what they had accomplished together. She thought about all the people who had become part of her story. Maria, now a successful business owner who employed other foundation graduates. Carl, whose legal expertise had helped win countless cases for homeless clients. The thousands of individuals who had walked through the foundation's doors, desperate and left with hope. Each of them carried a piece of her journey, just as she carried pieces of theirs. And she thought about the future. The challenges still to come, the work still to be done, the people still waiting to be seen, to be heard, to be given the chance they deserved. The foundation would continue. She had made sure of that. The structures were in place. The funding was secure. The team was dedicated. Even without Marcus, even without her eventually, the mission would persist. That was the nature of things built to last. But for now, she was still here, still fighting. Still believing. Eleanor Price stopped walking and looked up at the Arizona sky, vast and blue and full of possibilities. She thought about a desperate woman who had once walked this same desert, hungry and hopeless and convinced that her life was over. That woman had been wrong. So wrong. Her life hadn't ended. It had barely begun. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers, the same scent she had noticed on that fateful day 6 years ago. She closed her eyes and let it wash over her, feeling connected to something larger than herself. To the land, to the people she served, to the memory of those she had lost, to the hope of those she had yet to help. When she opened her eyes, she knew exactly what she needed to do next. There was always more work to be done, more people to serve, more impossibilities to overcome. and Eleanor Price was ready for all of it. The story doesn't end here. It continues in every person who watches this video and chooses to see the world differently, in every hand extended to someone in need, in every moment when compassion overcomes indifference. That's the real legacy. Not buildings or foundations or medals. The choices we make, the people we become, the difference we create. Rich biker teased, "Tame this beast and I'll pay $500. A homeless woman mastered what riders couldn't. But the real prize wasn't money. It was the reminder that every person has extraordinary potential, waiting for the moment when circumstances allow it to emerge. Check if you're subscribed to this channel. If you're not, subscribe now. This is where we tell stories that matter, stories that remind us who we can be when we choose courage over fear, compassion over judgment, action over apathy. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who might be going through their own dark night. Someone who might have forgotten that redemption is always possible. Sometimes the right story at the right moment can change everything. Leave a like if you believe in second chances, if you believe that no one is beyond hope, if you believe that the measure of our lives is not what we accumulate, but what we give away. And finally, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of a community that values these kinds of stories. Until next time, remember, the impossible is only impossible until someone does it. Maybe that someone is you.